You understand where I'm going with this. And that extra space combined with full-time professionalism meant it wasn't long until the collisions in our sport were compared to car crashes. And that's only one collision, by the way, not a combination of them. And to prepare players for that, the physical composition of a player becomes of paramount importance, if nothing else, just to make sure they're in one piece by the end of the game. And going back in defence 10 metres also meant efforts had to be redoubled in the fitness department to cut down attacking space if you didn't want to be blown off the park. On a podcast last week, Phil Gould said something along the lines of, we've only really learned how to be proper full-time professionals in the last decade. So this was 2024, he said this. So if he's right, that would mean up until about 2014 and earlier, we were in something of an experimentation phase with the physical aspects of the sport. So 2 decades at least as full-timers, adapting training methods to get the absolute best out of each player. And whatever happens in the top grades influences our youth and also our coaches of youth teams. Anybody who has played rugby league as a junior since the mid to late 1990s knows that once you get into your teens, a huge emphasis is placed on developing your body to meet the physical aspects of this sport. When I turned from being a player into a coach, it didn't take me long to realize that I'd been pigeonholed as a player. And I've seen it 1,000 times in my coaching career since, and I still see it each week. I was a prop or a back row forward, and I was expected to run in a direct fashion and tackle. I had never been truly taught how to pass. Never taught how to play the ball and strategy. You're kidding, aren't you? It wasn't until some of my later coaches at higher levels I got some idea of strategy. Prior to that, I was often told off by a coach at various stages for passing when I should have run. And I never, ever got taught to see my role as part of a bigger strategical picture until I got again to certain levels. And even then, it was in a box, if you like. And to this very day, there are junior programs in Australia that have been very successful over the years. Yet many of their players come out of those particular systems with very poor skill levels. That's all I'm saying. Instead, they are huge individuals and can bench press, squat, and deadlift better than most adults. Somewhere along the line, rugby league started to become overly obsessed with physical prowess at the expense of skill and strategy teachings. Stories about junior rep systems in Australia conducting 3-hour training sessions that are predominantly strength and fitness based and often include kids who have been in a school football program during the daytime. Those stories abound. The talk from media types and many coaches around this sport also laments the lack of halves being developed in it, encouraging some NRL clubs to initiate halves academies in a bid to reverse the processes that the community game has obviously gone through to produce what's coming out. You've heard the saying, and this annoys me, halves need to run the football, or they're not playing well, they're not running the football, and it's something I hate. Halves should always go at the line with themselves as an option to run, not premeditated. Bring attacking shape to right and left and keep their hips square or 45 degrees so that if the space opens up, they can easily go through that gap. Instead, what we have is a game full of halves who sometimes feel the premeditated need to run the ball because they get preconditioned to pass. But they've got to run to keep their coaches and the media happy if they're in at that level. To me, a good half can make other players look good And they don't always feel the need to get on the highlight reel themselves. And coaching like this takes pressure off young halves everywhere. If you actually teach them how to play rather than say it all rests on you. Kids are now bigger than ever naturally, and before they even reach a gym, some of them are huge. Many junior coaches can assemble a big squad and win their competition easily by steamrolling everyone else with size. And that means the half just has to share the ball around the big people to ease the workload for them. And if they can kick, well, if the opposition manage to hold them out for a set and they can kick, the opposition have to come out from their own end. Smaller teams have to be a bit more creative, but the problem is tactics have been left behind with this evolution of the sport. And many halves are given bucket loads of instructions and often a playbook, just like the halves of the 1970s and the 80s, or just like NFL quarterbacks. And in my opinion, either of those approaches result in one thing: players being taught robotically. Carry out this set, carry out this play over and over and over. And then these kids that I'm talking about have become adults and they lack the vision to play football in many cases. Or if they have a vision, they have a coach who doesn't trust their vision and puts crazy playing structures in place. I have seen teams ignore what the coach gives them when they are behind on the scoreboard. I know of teams that have gone out on the field at the highest levels and come up with their own game plan because they believe the coaches are putting too much of a straitjacket on them. And as I explained earlier, there's 10 meters gap now, and this is why I don't feel the game has truly embraced what having 10 meters gap means. So to me, a good half doesn't have to pull as many rabbits out of the hat as one of 20, 30 years ago or more. I can't understand the strategic rationale of so many coaches who are obsessed with robotic plays at the expense of encouraging their players to play what is in front of them. I often refer to rugby league as a sport of motion and emotion. The motion element refers to how attacking teams attempt to generate momentum with fast play the balls, with footwork at the line, trying to evade people who are tackling them rather than trying to run over them. Whereas the emotion aspect concerns how we deal with that momentum. So, for example, if you do a set where players are avoiding trying to be tackled front on with good footwork, and you get tackled too right, the chances are the rest of your set will be good. And then at which point you move the ball sideways. And that's the emotion after the motion. That's what I'm talking about. And I'll break this down more over the weeks if you want. What I will say at this juncture, though, is that anything remotely robotic should be parked by us coaches until the team has mastered the art of how to generate momentum in attack without obsessive structure. And it starts with keeping things simple. Because there's an old saying about rugby league that I've heard plenty of times. It's a very simple game overcomplicated by idiots. I like to say it in a bit less of a brutal way. And that's that Einstein would have trouble doing his scientific equations if he had 13 people in different coloured jerseys trying to bash him. And to me, there's a simple reason for that, and it's something that applies to many sports too. White noise and fight or flight mode. I believe much of rugby league is played with white noise and sometimes in fight or flight mode because you're playing against 13 people that want to bash you when you run the ball, or you've got the ball in your hand and you're looking to give it to someone else. And you need to coach in a way so simply that it cuts through that white noise of any game. So instead of telling players how smart you are at everything or coaching to the gallery that you are watching around you, be really clear with what you say and repeat it often. Your messages will cut through because you want your players to know what to do in the heat of battle when there's all that white noise and they're in fight or flight mode, or if they're in fight or flight mode. Get your team to do simple things, do them excellently and do them ruthlessly and repeatedly. And get them to do it better than any other team in the competition, the country, or even the world. Why not? My teams and my players, and therefore the coaches I work with, always have a maximum of 5 key things to underpin everything throughout training. And then the idea is this becomes second nature when it matters in games. And here's an example of 4 I have used most regularly with my teams. Teams need discipline. They need core offensive skills. They need core defensive skills. And they need to defend as a unit. I'll repeat those. Discipline, core offensive skills, core defensive skills, and defending as a unit. I'll elaborate more on these things as we go through the off-season podcast, and you're listening to Lee Addison of the Rugby League Coach Podcast. You can contact me on social media at Rugby League Coach. Send me a DM.